In this tutorial series, we would like to give you a comprehensive walkthrough of all the basic features of IFO, the language. Specifically, we want to use IFO for design. In order to have a running example throughout all the videos, let's generate one from scratch using the web tool called IFO New. So open the browser and then type the following URL on the address bar. So www.eecs.yorku.ca tilde ifo/ifo-new and then enter. And you will be prompted for your Passport York credential, and then I'll enter mine, you can enter yours. Okay, once you have successfully logged in, you will see this page over here. Let me emphasize something very important. So we are using IFO New just for this tutorial video here, but it shouldn't just stop here. Every time throughout the course, whenever you want to test certain design ideas, you should really go back to IFO New and then try to generate a new project from scratch. Try to experiment yourself since you're a scientist. Every time you're not too sure about particular ideas, you want to try it out, use experiments by IFO New. Okay. So, but for this, our particular tutorial purpose, we're going to create a new project called birthday book. Okay, let me type it out. Birthday underscore, that's a IFO convention, having underscore in between the compound words. Birthday book. And then let me also mention something I assume for the rest of the videos. I assume that number one, you have already installed the IFO Studio tool. If you haven't, you can refer to the pre-study materials that you were sent previously. I will also include a link of the documents in the description section for this video. And then you should also make sure you download the Math Models library, which every starter project generated by IFO New actually depends on. We are not going to use Math Models library for this tutorial series just yet, but we might need it later, so it's good to set it up first. And if you're not sure, please refer to the instruction over here. Okay. There are also other examples that you can also look at and some resources you can explore. Okay, but for now, let's generate the projects. I'll simply say submit. And then it's going to prompt me for where to store the project. Let me say I just want to store on the desktop. Okay, I'll just say save over here. So this is my desktop over here. I'm going to double click to unzip it. And this is the folder. Let me just show you very quickly about the folder structure of the generated project for every starter project actually. So the first file to look at is something called .ecf. ECF stands for IFO configuration. If you open it, it's actually an XML file. So I would say typically you really don't have to open this file and edit it. Okay, any setting that you may want to change ever, it can be more easily done and less error prone if you do it inside the IFO Studio under project setting. I will show you maybe later, but for now, let's not worry. Okay. And then there are three folders over here. We call the physical file location folders, but once we go to IFO Studio, we call them clusters. It's like in Java, you call folders packages, similar idea. Okay, so now the model folder currently is simply just empty. So our convention is every class that has to do with the logic of your application, they should go into model, the model logic. And also the root, you can have more than one classes in the root, but typically just one class. You can think about it's more like the entry point of execution of your projects. And then we got under the tests is quite self-explanatory. So that's actually as many test classes as you like to add test cases for unit testing, like a JUnit that you learned from the previous Java course. Okay, that's going to be the structure for every generated starter project. So now we're going to build on top of that. To do that, let's launch IFO Studio. So as I said, my assumption is you have already installed IFO Studio on your machine. Let me start by going to where the project folder is stored. So I'll simply go to desktop from my command line. And then on the desktop, if I say ls, by listing all the files, you can see this zip file is actually the one that's generated and downloaded from IFO New. And this is the unzipped version from the archive file. Depending on which operating system you're using, if you're using Windows, then you might simply just invoke IFO Studio from some shortcut. But for Mac or Linux, you may have to do it from the command line. Okay, let me just type it. So eStudio should be a link connecting to the latest version of IFO Studio. And then to run it on the background, I'll say %. Enter. And then in the beginning, for the very first time, so this open project panel over here should be empty. But if that's not empty, that's fine. That means you have some previous project loaded. What you should do is, there might be, throughout the semester, you might add in as many projects as necessary over here, but let's now do our first one to add. So you can see this add project over here, click on that, and then go to desktop, and go into birthday book, and always, if you want to compile a project, always choose the ECF file, okay? If you click on that, and now the project has been added, and now we want to compile, okay? You can see there is one option here called clean with a text box. Currently, it is disabled simply because, let me just show you quickly. You can see under this project folder here, there is not a folder called ifgens. ifgens stands for IFO generation file. Basically, IFO is a design language. Under the hood, IFO is compiled into C code. ifgens folder, which I just mentioned, stores all the generated C code over there. So those will actually take quite a lot of storage. So you want to make sure when you are not really using a particular project for a long time, you should really delete the ifgens folder. Okay. But for now, since we have no ifgens folder in that particular project, so the clean version is not there. But I'm just saying, later on, maybe I'll remember to show you later in the series. If you want to recompile from scratch, you can close IFO Studio, open it again, and then this option here should be enabled, and choose it to recompile from scratch. That's one option for you. Okay. And now let's just say compile. And then you can see, the compiler is now busy compiling, which is going to generate the ifgens folder. Let me show it to you. Okay, so now compilation is quite a small project to begin with, so it's rather quick. We got basically cluster model, which corresponds to folder model. We got cluster root, cluster tests, etc. Okay, let me show you one more thing. You can see under the folder birthday book, you can now see this is really the ifgens folder I talked about, right? It stands for IFO generation. And under that, you can see this is the project birthday book. And also, you got the various folder over here. Okay, you don't have to worry too much, at least for now. Okay, let's now return to IFO Studio. The first thing I would like to show you is about a root class. As I mentioned before, root class can be considered as the entry point of execution. So now if you look at the default root class, you can also launch that from the root cluster over here and then click on the root. Oh, but it's open by default. Let's go to the root class over here, and then I want you to pay attention to the inherit class over here. This is something called multiple inheritance, which doesn't exist in Java. It's a unique design feature for IFO language. So you can have more than one parent classes. Okay. So now let's take a look at these two parent classes over here. So ES Suite. So this one is actually for unit testing. So let's just change the comments over here quickly. By the way, if you want to do comments in your program code, it has to be double dash. Okay. It's different from the Java convention. So let's say this is for unit testing. For you to combine different testing classes, which we'll see later in the video. And what about arguments 32? You can think about arguments is really for command line arguments. So this is really for console output. Okay, so now what we are doing is we are inheriting from two parents, and then we try to do two different things. Number one, we want to do console output. And in order to do console output, we have to use the features or methods inherited from arguments 32. For example, if you look at the first line of the make feature over here, is called a print over here. So that's almost like a system.out print line in Java. So this line here is using feature from argument 32. Whereas the rest over here, for example, you want to add a unit test, you want to show the browser to show the test report, and also to run the all the test cases. So these features actually come from the ES Suite class for unit testing. So we are really trying to do two things at one go. Let me show you how confusing it could be. Okay, so now let me just predict what's going to happen. When we run this particular make feature over here as an entry, like a main method, first of all, it's going to print to the console this particular line, welcome to eStudio 1905, and then it's actually going to do two things for the unit testing part. It's first of all going to run the test and generate a report in two forms. One is to generate a report as a textual form into the console. And the second one is to generate a report as an HTML page. So we got three things that's going to be resulted from running this program. So let's try that quickly. So in order for you to execute the program, like in Eclipse, you're going to say run the class as Java application. So now you can think about we are running this particular code as iPhone application. So let me say run over here, and then we're going to see the three outputs. Number one, if I go to my web browser, you can see this is the HTML test report that's generated. That's one. Okay. And then if I go to my console over here, there are two parts I can look. Starting from the bottom there, all the way up to test example, that's the test class that's generated by default. This is simply just some report in the textual form, which is consistent with the HTML report over here. We're going to see that in detail later. And then number three, this is the console output line from that print statements over there, over here. Okay, so now we are really doing two things: console output and also unit testing in a single entry point of execution. That could be confusing sometimes. So what we would like to do is to really have it for the purpose of separation of concern. We're going to split them into two classes, and then which one we want to execute, we have to make a choice. Okay, let's see how we can do it. First of all, let's create a new potential root class, like a potential entry point of execution. So we want to add a new class under the root cluster. So I want you to click on this particular root cluster by selecting it, and then there's a button here for creating a new class, add a new class. You can either do it from there, or you can simply go to tools and then go to new class. Either way. Okay, let's say I go from here and then I'll say new class over here under the root cluster. Let me call that maybe still root, but maybe call root underscore console. Okay, so again, for compound words in iPhone, it should be separated by underscore. It's a naming convention. Okay, and then I say creates. Okay, that's my new root class. And then to save you some typing, I would suggest we simply go back to our original root class over here. Oh, by the way, you can see every time if I switch between classes, it will still be in the same tab, right? But if you want to just have two tabs open in parallel, you may just want to double click on the empty region over here. Click on that, there's an empty tab, and now I can just simply click on root. So now I got root and root console separately. Okay, so now let me first of all go to the root class, and then let me copy the inherits and all the way to the end. Okay, simply copy that. Okay, once you have Control C to copy, and by the way, if you're using Mac, you also have to say Control C. You cannot say Command C. Okay, it's just something special. If I go back to root console over here, so what I will do, okay, replace this end here, otherwise it's not going to compile. Control V. Okay, so now let's do one by one. For the root console over here, I want to get rid of multiple inheritance, not because multiple inheritance is not good. It's a very good design idea, but just for this case, we want to do separation of concern. For root console, we only want to do console output, so get rid of the unit testing parent class. And then in this particular, under the make, we'll only leave this particular print statement here. That's all we want to do, okay? And then a very good practice I want you to remember, hopefully I can keep emphasizing to you, you should really try to do recompilation by just hitting the compile to the incremental compilation for every one or two changes of your code. That's something you want to train yourself to do it. It should be almost like a reflexive action. You really don't want to say, I work on my project for almost 1 hour or 2 hours, and then I will hit compile, and then suddenly you may have hundreds of compilation errors. That's not the ideal situation you want to get yourself into. Okay, that's about our root console here, and then we'll go to our root class. Okay, let me go here, click on the tab. So now for this particular class, we want to do unit testing only. So let's get rid of the argument 32. Okay. And then for here, for the entry point, like a main method, I'll get rid of the print statements. Okay, so now I have separate two potential candidates. Okay, but now if I simply hit on run, so now what's going to happen? Okay, which one am I going to get? Am I going to get the console output for welcome message to iPhone Studio, or should I get the test report? Okay, let's see. If I hit run over here, what I will see is, you can see number one, I still get, you can see it's a new tab here on my web browser. I still get a test report, and then if I go to my console, you can see I still get basically another, actually should be starting from here, okay? So this is actually from the previous section. Okay, just don't get confused. So for the last execution session there, I just got this test report. I didn't have any console output, which is a good thing. So now I don't really have two things at one go. So now why is this? Why is it actually only printing the test report? But what about the console, right? So that really has to do with which class has been set as the root class. As I said, it's the entry point of execution. So let me show you directly. Okay, that's the main learning outcome for this particular video. So I want you to go to projects and go to project settings. Okay, and then you open this particular panel over here. I want you to look at click on target over here. You can see under targets, the birthday book is the project name. And now here you can see the root. So this is the trick. You can see currently the entry point of execution is simply root class and its make feature. So you can see under the root class, under the make feature, we're now doing unit testing only. What if I want to print out something to the console? Hopefully you will see what I should do, right? So now I should really change the root class. Okay, so I will go to root, so type root console. So I'm simply changing the root class into the root console over here. I believe this the main method is still called make. It doesn't have to be called make. As we'll see later, in IFO you can call any name you like for the class constructor, but there will be some constraint you have to be careful. Okay, but for now I'll just say okay and then okay. In order for this to take effects, I have to say compile. Okay, after this, let me run again. I shouldn't see any HTML report being pop up again. Okay, I don't have that. And then I'll simply go back to my console over here. You can see this was the second execution session from the previous one, and this was the first one. And now in the third one, I only have the console message, right? So now you can see I can switch between either root console or root depending on which one I need. Okay, but let me also mention something to you very important. I would say whenever you want to do debugging, right? Maybe back in your 2031, the C course or Unix course, you're very used to debugging software bugs by using console outputs or output to the terminal. Just use print statements. So maybe you're more tempted to actually switch the root class to simply this particular argument 32 child class over here. I would say try to minimize or even eliminate such practice. As we'll see, since we're talking about design at large, the idea, so you should really train yourself to use breakpoints and debugger as the debugging mechanism rather than using just console output. I'm showing this to you just to show you can switch between root classes. Okay, let me just say one more thing. If the current execution of entry point of execution is actually some console output, then you only say run over here. That's all you got to do. Just say run. Okay. Let me switch back to the root, and then I'll explain one more detail to you, and then we'll end the video. Let me just go to projects, and then go to project settings, and then again targets, and now I want to change back to just root.make rather than root console. So now I'll change back to the root class for unit testing only. Okay, don't forget to compile. Every time if you want your changes to take effects, you have to recompile. Okay, it has been recompiled. You can see usually when you change between one root class to another, it might take slightly longer to recompile. Okay, so now I want to show you if the current entry point of execution, well, I might just say if the current root class, right? If the current root class is actually doing unit testing, you have two options over here. Either you can say run, in which case you will get two outputs. One is, you can see the browser, this is just the third tab, right? There's the HTML report. The other one is simply just the this guy over here, right? So that's actually fine. It's not too bad. However, there will be some drawback, as we'll see. If you all you want to do is to do unit testing, but if you only click on run, there will be some important differences which I wouldn't highlight here. It wouldn't make too much sense. But once we talk about how you can write some meaningful test cases, later I will talk about. But I want to show you the option first. Either you can say run, it's going to give you HTML, going to give you console output, no problem. You can also say, click this upside down triangle over here around run. Click on that, and then there's one option here called Run Workbench System. Okay, so now if I click on that over here, it's going to bring me to the HTML report directly. which means somehow it doesn't really show me the console output. Oh, okay, if you see the console output, it is still there, it's always there. But it's now the HTML report that actually has the priority to be seen by the developer. Okay, so now the important question is this. What's really the difference between, let's say my current class is doing unit testing only. What's the difference between hitting on run versus hitting on Run Workbench System? Okay, let me make it short to you, and then I will elaborate on that later. If you click on upside down triangle and say Run Workbench System, what you're doing is you're going to run the entire system, including many test cases, as a unit testing run, which means there might be some violation or exception happening, but when those exceptions are actually expected, they wouldn't be considered as failure. That's when you actually do Run Workbench System. Okay, I will show you that a little bit later. Actually, let me mention that for the first time. On the other hand, if you click on run, what's going to happen is it's going to run basically your unit test as a normal IFO application. If there's any exception that's happening at the runtime, the very first one will interrupt the flow of your system. In which case, if you click on run, if there's any exception, it's going to show you the stack trace leading to that particular exception. And in that case, that wouldn't be considered as a success. Okay, it's a very quick mention, but I will definitely revisit this point later. The final thing I would like to do together with you is to change the unit test a little bit. Again, if you want to just run the unit testing framework, so I will choose the upside down triangle, and then I will click on Run Workbench System. Think about this, you only click on Run for unit testing if you want to debug. If you only want to see the test report to see whether all passed or at least one failed, you will actually go click on the upside down triangle and then Run Workbench System. Currently, it's simply showing some failure because it's intentional from the generated code. Let me just what would be the easiest way to get a green bar? Let's do that, and then you will set it up for the later videos. Okay, so let me just simply go back to iFlow Studio. Can you expand the tests cluster over here? Go to this default test example here. Okay, let me just say save changes. And now you can see there are many test cases over here. You can see you got T0, T1, and also T2, etc. Right? So now let's say I get rid of all of them. So starting from T0 here, all the way to this one. Don't get rid of this end here. It belongs to the class. Okay, get rid of them, and also get rid of all the stuff over here under the make. Okay, just make it clean. And the only thing I want to add, first of all, let's make sure everything compiles. If as a compile, everything's fine. Okay, so now, but you should have at least one test case for your test class, at least one. Let me give you something that will always pass. And this one is similar to how you will do in JUnits, right? In JUnits, if your test method can be executed without any exception happening, it will be considered as a success, right? In iFlow, it's slightly different, slightly. So there are two kinds of test cases you can write. Let me just write the first one for you. It's called a Boolean test case, okay? Let me just say T always passes, right? I'll give you some informative name over here. And then it does not take any parameter, and then the return value over here. Okay, again, you want to get used to the syntax. So in iFlow, you will put a return value first and then a method name. But in iFlow, you want to put a feature and then a colon is like a declaration of the type for the feature. So in this case, the return value. So now you should always return the Boolean. So Boolean is a keyword, okay? And then you want to have a block syntax over here. So you do an end. So inside this particular do an end, it will be the implementation for this particular query or the feature. Okay, so now always for the test case, whenever you're creating each test case, you must include the following. It's called a comments section. Okay, so simply type comments, and then you can try to do code completion, control space. It's going to give you this particular feature that's inherited from the ES test. Okay, click on enter. So now I got comments over here. So comments should go in this way. Put a string pro over here, and then give the name of the test. And then colon. So this is some format you must follow every time if you want to create your own test cases. Always put the comments call over here, and then the argument there should be a string, and for the string it should be separated by the name of the test case, and also some short comments, and then the delimiter should be a colon. Okay, a test always passing. How do we do that? Okay, so now this particular method or feature will clarify the terminology for feature just a little bit later. But over here, the return value is simply a Boolean, okay? But there's no return keyword in iPhone. Whenever you're talking about some accessor, like returning something, you have to store that into a keyword called result, okay? So here I'm gonna say result is assigned to, let's say true, it's always true. So for Boolean case, it will be considered as a success if the final value for the result is actually true. If the final value for result is actually false, or if there's any violation or exception happened, it will be considered as a failure. Okay. Okay. So now you can think about implicitly. There's like a return result implicitly, but you never write it as a developer, right? So always you just have to make sure you reassign the return value for your accessor or query. In which case we use the keyword result and then assign to whatever type, because in this case it's Boolean, so that's why we assign true to it. And then we say compile. So now one more thing before we are done. Okay, we're only declaring the test feature over here, but now we will want to add it to the test case. Right? To do it, you have to go to this particular make command make method over here. So here I'm still not being very careful about using method, feature, accessor, mutator, query, command, etc. I will clarify the terminology in a later video, but for now, that's okay. So now, under this make method over here, what I will do is, I'm going to add this particular test. In the case of Boolean test, it's very easy. You simply click on add, control space for code completion. So the first one, add Boolean case. Okay, so now I want to add that particular one. So now be careful, you have to use a keyword agent. Don't worry too much for agents, for not just take it for granted, you can always refer back what you should type. But we'll explain about agents later in the course. But to make it short, agent is like a pointer to function that you learn in the C course. So rather than simply calling this Boolean query right now, right away, we're going to make a pointer to it for delay execution. So copy the name and then we'll simply put it here after the agent over here. Okay. So a very common mistake students make is they simply put the name of the query over here, but they forgot to type the agent. So this is wrong. If you hit compile, you can try. If you hit compile, it's gonna fail. So what we should do is put the agent back. Okay. Again, as I said, you whenever you want to create new test cases, you want to pay attention to the details for this particular new language that you're learning. Okay. And then I say compile. Okay, let me just say, click on the upside down triangle and say Run Workbench System. If I click on that, so now I have only one test case, which is T always. You can see that's exactly what I put inside the comments call over here, right? As again, this is always required. Otherwise, your test may have a weird behavior. Always make sure you put this particular comment call. Again, the name of the feature for the test, and also some short comments over here. And the delimiter should be a colon. Okay, so now we only got one Boolean test case, and the final value for the result is simply true over here. We're cheating a little bit over here. That's okay. We're just making the test report to have a green bar. So the idea would be every time when you're gradually adding test cases to your developments, you want to make sure you always get a green bar. If you're making a change to your software such that it introduces some errors so that you have a red bar, what you should do is you should fix the error right away before you can move on with the developments. Okay, so now our entry point of execution is actually the root class over here, and then we have a green bar. So in the later videos, we'll start developing more meaningful test cases.